At 2:11, the town went dark, so cleanly it felt intentional. Not a flicker, not the stuttering stumble of a transformer dying, but decisive unmaking. Street lamps blinked out, porch lights surrendered. The diner's neon script drew one last cursive stroke and vanished. The silence that followed had weight. In it, Coldwater Ridge could be heard exhaling. Snow softening, pines settling, a distant creek unbraiding itself in the thin air. Then the hum came. It wasn't electrical. It had no teeth, number 60 cycle grit, no ground loop hiss. It spread like warm breath on glass, a pressure that made dogs stiffen and press their snouts against wooden doors. People woke without knowing why. Pinched bridge of nose, tongue tasting pennies. Phones dead. The cellular bar showed plenty of coverage. Nothing moved behind them. Wi-Fi networks ghosted in lists that could not be joined. Someone swore they still could hear the old landline ringing from when the diner's rotary phone sat on the counter by the jar of toothpicks and dollar bills. But when he lifted the receiver in his memory, no one answered there either. The first light arrived without sound. It wasn't a headlamp cresting a switchback, wasn't a plane, wasn't a drone, wasn't anything carsick or measurable. A sphere the color of a snowflake, held up to a candle eased out of tree lean, and took the sky as if it had been letting the night borrow it all along. Then a second, offset and lower, as though checking the first math. Above the town, a decommissioned radar dome, white cracked, beloved by graffiti. Thumped once, as if remembering how to have a heartbeat. Mara Ellison, who was not from here, who had come to vanish and had almost managed it, watched from the hillside trailer she was renting under a name that would have sounded false in any place that knew her story. She had been asleep at the little table, face on papers, a coil of cokes climbing the wall to a hand-built SDR rig, because Mara was always the sort of person to build her own ears. The blackout woke her, the hum held her still, and the light made her stand. Even in sleep clothes, she reached for habits. Boots by the door, the recorder on the shelf, a parka whose left cuff had a nicotine burn from a life she no longer lived. She had spent 7 years in rooms with no windows, hearing the world through equipment that came with red covers and badge readers and other people's clearances. She had left all of that, and it had not left her. Mara dragged a cable to the trailer's roof, clipped a loop antenna to the vent, and listened to the night. No radio was alive, but the air was full of listening. She could feel it in the way her jaw wanted to click. The lights did not wobble. They marked a right angle with the town's water tower, and the domed radar, like a measuring tool, hung on the sky. Snowlight reflected off in the way it reflects off a deer's eye, bright, wrong, unsourced. Mara set the recorder, running out of respect for future Mara. Who would ask past Mara if she had remembered to be a scientist when the world turned myth? Down in town, someone's generator coughed and died. A string of curses arced over planks. The hum seemed to approve, or perhaps did not notice. 30 seconds later it rose half a note, and everyone's feelings hurt. The radar dome thumped again. Mara turned to it. From this angle it looked like a dead pearl on a ruined shell. Coldwater's highest tourist attraction. The place teenagers dare each other to touch. A Cold War leftover with chain-link fence and holes cut into it with patience and cutters and stories. No one had fed it power in 12 winters. Now it was remembering verbs. She killed her porch light out of habit, caught herself smirking. There was no power to kill, and focused a field recorder on the dome. Nothing. Then at the edge of hearing, a soft return, a heartbeat heard through a wall. Her loop antenna whispered into her headphones. Static organized itself into a surface. Mara sat with it the way you sit with a person who is about to cry. A line cutter on her recorder screen drew a horizon, then a cliff. It would have been nothing if she hadn't seen the same cliff once on a day when an analyst 3 seats down had said, softly, "That can't be altitude." The lights held. A third came, then a fourth, arranged not like pilots but like surveyors. On the other side of town, a man who had worn a uniform on the dome still had a pulse opened a wooden chest. In it lay a green notebook, a cassette with cracked label, and a folded map stained by coffee and an old leak. He put the cassette in a player and pressed play. The tape rolled, stretched, sighed, and offered back a sound that had not been in the world for decades. A notch in the noise where a thing had stood and said nothing. On Channel 9 of CB radio, a frequency no one monitored anymore, and yet everyone kept. The dead air cleared its throat. A girl's voice spoke. 13 maybe, breathless and too calm to be acting. "Hello. If you can hear me, don't look straight at it." Mara had 1,000 questions and a single job. She marked the time. She wrote the sky's right angle in the margin of a page that had held another life's grocery list. She watched the light the color of what snow remembers lift 1 inch, then 2, obeying a geometry she did not know. Her breath made loops in the cold. The dome thumped a 3rd time. The hum fell away. Every light in town came back at once. But the lights above Coldwater Ridge did not leave. They only turned, as if they had been waiting for the power to return so they could begin. 2 miles away, the radar's dead screen wakes to a single line that climbs in a way gravity can't explain. An old tape in a stranger's hands plays a warning that ends with Mara's name. He hadn't listened to cassette in 30 years. Walter Crane had kept it because men like him kept things. Notebooks with lines of numbers whose meaning had fled, coins pressed flat by trains, photographs of aircraft that were not supposed to be photographed. He had been a radar tech when Coldwater's dome still turned. The dome had been his job and his excuse, his monastery and his marriage that failed because the thing he loved did not love him back. The tape had come home in his pocket on a night when he'd been told not to keep it. He told himself he was keeping evidence of a mistake. Privately, he kept proof that he wasn't crazy. When the town sighed into darkness, Walter woke with his hand already moving to the nightstand for the flashlight he no longer needed, because his skin knew where everything was in the cave of his bedroom. He heard the hum and called it wrong in his bones before his brain caught up. He carried himself down the hall like a patient man carries a glass of water. He opened the cedar chest. The smell was a companion of his whole life. He pressed play. The tape sounded tired but game. A scratch, a skip, then that notch, a band of noise bitten out. The kind of thing that would get you told the equipment needed calibration. The kind of thing that, when you replayed in a room with 6 other techs, would make everyone clear their throat and pretend it was nothing, because if it were something, then too much else had to be true. The notch slid. Units told him how fast. His ear told him how wrong. He felt in his failed molar, and the scar on his thumb from the day, he learned what a hot waveguide does to flesh. Tonight the notch aligned with something outside. He could feel it, like thunder you register in your sternum, because you are an animal before you are a man. On his desk, the green notebook lay open to a page from February 1978. Blue notch. Lat/long same as ridge. No wind. No aircraft. Unexplained. Watch band V. Beneath, a sketch of a diamond drawn with 4 dots, a right angle like a carpenter proud of his square. He touched the drawing as if it would be warmer than paper. Outside, the dog across the street gave a single disobedient howl, and then remembered he belonged to someone and stopped. At the dome, a breaker he had turned off with his own hands carried current no one was sending. Walter sat on the chair he had been promised would support his weight until he died and considered the possibility that the promise had just been renewed. He looked at the phone. He looked at the tape. He didn't look at the window because he already knew the shape that would be looking back. On the ridge, the lights changed nothing and therefore changed everything. They had not spoken, had not descended, had not left scorch, had not stolen anyone or burned anything or waved. They had arranged themselves into a problem a human could solve if that human were patient and unafraid of being wrong in public. Mara Ellison was neither patient nor unafraid, but she had never been wrong alone. She had a gift for collecting strangers who could hear the same off-key pitch. She texted out of habit 3 people who would not reply at this hour or this epoch. She wrote a message to no one in particular. Right angle, not ours. Dome alive. And did not send it, because she could see the lights from her doorway, and committing the fact to a network that had just died felt like a betrayal. Her recorder printed a spinal cord of ink across thermal paper. The loop antenna trembled, then calmed. Wind learned its place again. The hum stepped back like a polite host. Channel 9 crackled. The voice again. A calm 13 that might not be 13, that had the steadiness of a nurse in a war. Don't look into the center. Use the corner of your eye. If your dog is shaking, hold his collar and talk low. Don't shout. the girl said. If you can hear me, you are close enough. If you're close enough, it means they picked you. The word, they entered the room like a draft. Walter hit pause out of old fear. The girl's words stopped mid-breath. The room exhaled in relief. He stared at the plastic button under his thumb. How many times had he wished for a pause on nights when the dome drew pictures on scopes like a child with too much chalk? The power came back. The lights inside his house took a vote and decided together to glow. Walter did not move. At the dome, a voltage regulator older than some of the town's fathers flattered itself into relevance and hummed. Dials twitched. A nearby camera that should have been offline saw a gray, and then saw a line, and then saw the line move upward against reason, as if altitude could be drawn by whim. Mara broke. She ran for her truck. The snow cooperated like it had been told this part already. Her headlights gave the night permission to admit it was night. The ridge wore the lights like earrings no one in town could afford to buy. The road to the dome was a switchback of apologies and new dents. She made it in third gear by sweet-talking the clutch. The chain-link fence admitted her with a sigh, where teenagers had taught it to be polite. Inside the dome's base, the air held the smell of old electronics, dried mouse droppings, and the dust particular to rooms that once took themselves very seriously. Consoles slept forever, except one. A screen burned green. Mara loved and hated that color. It said to the body, trust the way hospital walls ask you to be calm. It said to the mind, secrets, the way a stamp says confidential, and means danger and we will blame you. On the screen a single line climbed, not steeply but without regard for known physics. It sloped wrong by exactly the amount an honest engineer would apologize for and then insist was a sensor error. Hello? Someone said behind her, and Mara turned with a speed she had promised herself to stop using. Walter Crane stood in the doorway with his cassette player, like a weapon made of memory. You don't know me, he said, but I think we both know that thing up there knows you. Mara hated when the past remembered her. Play it, she said. He pressed play. The tape delivered the notch. The dome offered the same notch back in the air the way a canyon offers back your voice with the shape of its own throat. Then the girl. Mara Ellison, you can't keep being angry at them for not answering the questions you haven't asked. Mara's blood moved wrong. She reached blindly, found the console, anchored herself to a machine she didn't trust to save her. She met Walter's eyes and saw an old soldier's relief at no longer being alone in the crazy. The green line on the scope settled at an angle that any cadet would circle in red. Band V, Walter said, almost tender. They always liked V. They, Mara said, but the word was different in her mouth, bigger, unpunctuated. Outside, the lights rotated without rotating. The right angle held. The town's clock tower chimed 3 times. On 3, every dog exhaled, and someone in a house on Maple shouted the name of a child who did not live there anymore. Don't look straight at it, the girl said again, as though she thought she might have been unclear the first time. Use the corner of your eye. So, we do what she says. Walter said. We don't take orders from ghosts on CB. Mara said. Then call a suggestion from your own tape deck. Walter said, and lifted the player higher, as if he could make the voice fill the room instead of the sky. Mara glanced, not at the lights, but at the corner where green met black on the scope. The line had a hitch in it, a notch to itself. Banvie tasted like winter apples, and a coin you put in your mouth as a bet you lost. She looked sideways through the window, not into the center. The lights got brighter when you didn't meet them. She blinked away tears she told herself were just the wind. Okay, she said, not to Walter. Okay, the girl's voice said, not to Mara. The dome's breaker tripped by itself and then settled, an old habit returning. The lights outside adjusted to the town's power returning, as though the grid had been a courtesy they had been waiting for. Why me? Mara asked the window. Why now? The tape did not answer. The sky did. The scope writes a number in its own language, for slanted marks and a pause, and Walter recognizes it as a coordinate that points not to the ridge, but to an abandoned missile silo down the valley. Silo 13. Silo 13 was where teenagers dared each other to drink warm beer and throw the cans hard enough to hear the echo complain. The government had capped it with concrete and ignored it with conviction. Land changed hands, rumors multiplied, and the fence told every deer, "Run around me. I am only theater." The coordinate the scope drew didn't look like any coordinate, but Walter lay his green notebook beside the screen and traced the slanted marks as if they were hawk tracks in snow. A habit of mine clicked. The marks weren't numbers. They were edges. The pause wasn't a pause. It was a corner. He rotated the book 90 degrees. The slants became a grid. The corner became a right angle. The coordinate wasn't latitude/longitude. It was a position in a lattice none of their maps knew they had. 13, he said, and Mara hated that he sounded sure. Why not the ridge, she said. Because every story wants you to look at the crown while the trick happens in the pocket, Walter said. They want you at the ridge. So we go where the lattice says. Again, Mara said, but the word was less a challenge now and more like a shape she was learning with her tongue. Channel 9, obedient to a future that already lived, offered the girl's voice with no static. Don't go alone, she said, which would have been unhelpful advice had it not arrived at two people who had already failed to be alone. Mara grabbed her keys. Walter tucked the cassette into his jacket, as if he were putting a child to bed. The truck coughed into a personality and then behaved. The road down to the valley was honest ice with lies of gravel. The sky above the ridge did not chase them. It waited for lights making a square carpenter would frame a house with. As they left the dome, Mara felt a sensation she had known only 3 times before, the world adjusting the height of its floor. Once it happened when she first learned what a certain kind of encrypted traffic meant. Once when her father died with only a text message to mediate the event. Once when she met a woman who loved her with the patience of a lake, and then left with the efficiency of a knife. The sensation did not ask for permission. It merely added itself to her, as though she had been designed to carry it. They stopped 2 switchbacks above Silo 13. Mara killed the headlights out of courtesy to whatever lived in the dark. Walter pointed with the composure of someone who prefers pointing to explanations. The silo's capped mouth sat in a shallow, like a coin in a palm. Frost had written delicate sermons across the concrete. A chain hung from a gate that had not felt human touch in a year, if not 10. The chain was closed. The lock was loyal. The frost lay on both in an even layer. Open, Mara said, because the chain had the posture of something pretending to be closed. Walter took the chain in his hands. It was as cold as honesty. He lifted. The whole run of chain lifted with him. The lock coming up light as a lie. The last link not secured to anything but the belief that it was. He swung the chain wide and let it kiss the fence post like a neighbor. Theatrical, he said. Or polite, Mara said. They walked in. The hum returned, not above them now but below. Not power, presence. The concrete cap wore the kind of hairline cracks that grow in the company of seasons and get named by the men who check them. The lightning bolt, the river, the hand. The cap also wore, tonight, a pulse, a broad, slow brighten, as if the concrete were learning to be bioluminescent. Don't look at the center, Walter said, half joke, mostly prayer. Mara looked at the edge. The edge was where the world tells the truth, because it forgets to lie there. A shimmer lived along the seam between cap and the throat below. It spoke not in language, but in a promise of language the way a baby's babble tells you the mouth is practicing vowels. Her recorder wrote black on white, a hum that organized itself into a chord, and then forgot the chord, and then remembered it again. What happens if we knock? She asked. Walter hit the concrete with his knuckles, gently first, and then with the gravity of an old man asking a heavy door for the favor of moving. The echo came not upward as a gentleman would expect, but inward, as though the silo were larger in the 4th direction than in the 3 they'd begged it for. Then the air changed the way it does before lightning, as if the ground were stretching a finger upward to see if the sky wanted to hold hands. Something pale lifted from the throat, a marble the size of a jacket button, slow and sovereign, as if buoyed by a liquid thick as silence. It rose to the surface of the world without breaking it and hovered an inch above the cap. Mara had the immediate and irrational conviction the thing had eyes, and was choosing not to use them yet. It's a survey marker, Walter said, though the word survey did not fit here unless you took it apart. Sir, over, There to see and made with the truth, a thing here to see over. Mara reached. Don't, Walter said. Why? Because it wants you to, he said. She stopped because she had learned, painfully, that wanting and being wanted were not the same event. The button marble pulsed once. The hum lifted a notch. The cap flickered. No, that wasn't the right word. It redrew itself 1 centimeter to the left and then back, like a poor animation of a world that had other concerns. Channel 9. If you're at the hole, the girl said, it means you listened. If you listen, you're part of it. Put your palm on the concrete. Don't push. Just answer. Answer what? Mara said to the sky that was not listening. The question you haven't asked, Walter said, because sometimes the best way to be useful is to be unhelpful in the exact same shape as the problem. Mara set her hand on the cap. The concrete was warmer than air, warmer than it should have been a night like this. The hum resolved into a chord that her body could sing, but her mouth couldn't. She felt in the cartilage, in old breaks. In the bad tooth she never fixed because it told the weather with more accuracy than the news. Under her palm the cap developed a texture. Not rougher, not smoother, just more true. The marble drifted an inch closer to her wrist like a moth adjusting to a porch light. What are we doing? She asked. We're making the wrong thing feel heard, Walter said. The cap vibrated, not up and down but forward into them. The world tilted the floor again. The marble blinked. No. She refused a word, but her mind supplied it anyway. Blink. The hum wrote a missing note. She knew it was missing because she had lived entire seasons with a sensation that something in her wanted a tone she had not heard since childhood and wouldn't name, because names made loss permanent. The missing note, she said. What? It's not ours, she said. We can't make it with our throats. It's a place. Walter listened. The hum seemed to be listening to them, too, or pretending to for their benefit. He touched the concrete with the back of his hand, as if to be rude on purpose to see if the world minded. It didn't. The marble drifted closer. Okay, he said. So, where do we get a place to sing a note? Mara smiled at the dark. We borrow a throat, she said, and looked up toward the ridge. When they lift their hands, Frost has traced a perfect copy of the radar geometry onto the silo cap, plus a new element. A tiny square labeled with 4 dots that maps, unmistakably, to the caverns under Coldwater Ridge. On nights when the ridge had a cloud, you could hear the caverns before you could see them. Air doing ambitious things in stone. Old water practicing being a river again. The entrance wasn't particularly secret. The secrecy lived in the way the townspeople edited stories around it. Someone would begin, back in 78, and then rethink. Someone else would supply a substitute anecdote about the high school's football field lights failing during homecoming, and the story would gentlify itself into an inventory of generators. Mara had a map, which is to say she had 3 maps, none of them true, all of them faithful. The county plat showed parcels, taxes, a boundary shaped like an argument. The tourist brochure showed a cartoon bear holding a fish under a waterfall that didn't exist outside of fundraising committees. The notebook Walter carried under his arm like a hymnal showed a geometry in pencil with the dots of a child counting stars. They parked at the end of a road that had the decency to admit it should have stopped earlier. Snow wore boot prints that did not belong to them, the kind of prints a night makes for itself when it is trying on stories. Mara kept a recorder in her pocket, not because she needed to, but because feeling it there made her less likely to shout at the sky. Walter walked with the steadiness of a man whose bones had learned the statistics of ice. Channel 9 offered the girl before they asked. If you hear me in the caves, she said, listen for the note the water holds and not the note the stone loves. The water hold a note? Walter said. Water remembers shape. Mara said. It complains when you put it somewhere rude. They ducked into the entrance that was not really an entrance so much as a permission, a slit in rock where pines held their breath to let you pass. Inside, their breaths met them and became a third thing, mist with opinions. Lights caught walls and offered back glints like eyes and then withdrew them. The floor negotiated with boots. Deeper, the ridge's throat widened into a room. Mara had the feeling she gets when a frequency she doesn't yet know is about to become all she knows for a while. She lifted the recorder. The hum from the silo was gone here. The ridge supplied its own. A resonance stood in the air the way a column stands. Load-bearing. Uninteresting until you realize you're standing under it. The water, just a film, a suggestion, ran down a lip of rock that had the decency to be honest about gravity. She knelt, touched the fill with 2 fingers, put them to her ear like a person checking a dog's heartbeat. "Listen to the water," she said. Walter did, and looked skeptical, which was one of the ways he told you he was trying. He set the cassette player on a dry stone shelf and pressed play. The girl's voice did not echo. It nested in the cave like a bird asking the room if it were safe. "Don't try to make the note," she said. "Let the room do it. Your throats can't." Whose throats can? Walter asked the cassette, which was unfair to the machinery, and also exactly the question. "The ridges," Mara said. "Stone throats. The missing note isn't a pitch, it's a size." She stood in the middle of the room, had a thought she hated, and executed it anyway. She sang. Not fully, just vowels mapped a hum she carried, sliding under it and over until room gave the smallest courtesy, a sympathy vibration, shy at first and then with a modest pride. The water line thickened. The stone decided to be generous. Walter's face changed from skeptical to child. He put his palm on a stalagmite like a parishioner and whispered, "Is this a sin?" and then laughed at himself for using the old language. The room answered, not with a missing note, not yet, but with a braid of overtones that made the hair on Mara's arms pretend to be an instrument. The recorder's paper drew a forest. The cassette hissed in agreement. "Add the cap's cord," Walter said, and Mara agreed that this was a sentence that would have sounded ridiculous in daylight. She remembered the hum at Silo 13, the way the cap liked to be seen sideways. She sang the shape of that hum in a place the ridge would recognize. Mouth closed, bones open, everything altered like a held breath released. The room got a little taller, without changing size. The note arrived, not a sound but an availability. The missing note had never been missing. It had been refusing to come to where they were. Now it did. The ridge's throat sang it from out of its own old geometry, and the water agreed, and the stone stopped pretending it didn't like being a bell. The right angle from the sky drew itself, faint and frost-white, across the damp rock wall nearest Mara's shoulder. Within the angle, 4 dots knew exactly where to stand. The lattice they had chased drew itself to scale. The room had always been the template. The ridge had been waiting for them to ask. Channel 9. "If you make the room be the place," the girl said, "the door will hold still." The door to what? Walter said to the cassette. His voice had respect in it. "To the sky held still," Mara said, remembering what the outline of miracle had felt like the last time she let herself believe in one. She touched the rock wall where the frost made geometry. It was not cold. The opposite. A warmth like breath from the far side moved into her palm and upper arm, and very politely asked, "Do you mean it?" "I don't know," she said, and for once being honest didn't feel like a failure. The ridge made a new note, a minor child of the major they had raised. The right angle brightened to chalk. The dots fattened like stars when you stare. Mara stepped back, because she had learned the hard way not to stand close to a door you haven't decided to open. Walter closed his eyes. "I can see it," he said, and Mara almost said, "You can't," and then remembered there are ways of being right that aren't winning. "What do you see?" she asked. "Coldwater," he said. "But not tonight. Some other night when the power stayed off." The room took a breath you could feel through your boots. The geometry on the wall clicks once, like a deadbolt in reverse, and a right angle becomes a frame to which they can see, without moving, the abandoned missile silo in blazing noon sunlight. Morning didn't arrive so much as it conceded defeat. The ridge wore a thin shawl cloud, and the town took attendance of what had not burned, what had not broken, what had not fled. The lights above Coldwater seemed to prefer the dark, yet by daybreak a single ore remained at Silo 13, patient as a bead of mercury that refused to choose a side of the scale. Mara and Walter took the gravel road at crawl. Windows cracked to let the world in because it felt wrong to shut out. The gate they had left politely ajar now stood wider, as if the wind had been practicing courtesy. Frost steamed off the chain link like breath from a horse. The orb hung exactly over the capped launch tube, No wobble, no drift, no lazy thermals. As fixed as a nail in a carpenter's chalk line. In daylight, it wasn't glowing so much as present. It refused the sky's blue. It disobeyed reflections. When clouds passed, shadows acknowledged the silo, the fence, the two human bodies, and then swerved around the orb like a superstition. Mara set the recorder on the hood. The trace came in faint, a low subsonic swell under the usual morning noises. Far-off trucks, a hawk testing a thermal, the pebble static of wind. It wants the ridge's note again, she said. Walter knelt and touched the concrete. Warm. Not warm like sunlight. Warm like breath. His fingers found a frost-trace geometry they left. Right angle for dots, the little square that mapped the caverns like a private joke between stone and sky. Last night it seemed to ask permission, he said. Or to test whether we'd listen, Mara said. Today it's measuring. What us? Walter asked. Scale. Compliance. Patience. I don't know. She hated not knowing, but she'd learned to prefer to pretending. A raven posted up on the fence post like a grumpy employee, its head cocked. It said nothing. It seemed to approve of nothing, and also of everything. Mara took a step closer to the orb. She didn't reach. Sometimes refusing to reach was the only language you had left. We heard you, she said softly. Now what? The orb responded in the only way it ever had. It changed context, not brightness. Context. The world behind it sharpened. The cap beneath it took on a microscopic crispness, as if the orb were a magnifying glass that magnified what things believed about themselves. The recorder drew a pulse. Mara's chest answered with a second one involuntarily. A body. Signal algorithm she resented and trusted. Across the field, cattle stood in a line nobody had arranged, facing nothing in particular with bovine sincerity. The line kinked at 90 degrees mid-pasture. Another line echoed it. Walter squinted. Survey, he said, and hated that he sounded proud. A truck engine grumbled onto the gravel and cut. Sheriff Lorraine Harker got out carefully, like a person who respected the dignity of both ice and dignity. She lifted her aviators and let her face do the part where questions go before they get raised. Morning, she said, and it was both greeting and test. Morning, Walter said. You're early. Town had a power wobble, Harker said, as if wobble were the official were assigned to miracles in polite daylight. Lines lit up the scanner, like it was the 4th of July at 2 a.m. reports of lights. Phones crapped out, then woke up pretended not to remember. Heard you two took a stroll. We did, Mara said. Harker studied the orb the way you study a stray dog, considering bite radius, mercy, paperwork. You folks planning to tell me this is a weather balloon I can arrest? I wouldn't recommend handcuffs, Mara said. It doesn't appear to have wrists. The sheriff's mouth twitched. What does it appear to have? Intent, Mara said, immediately wishing she hadn't. They walked in a careful little triangle, human geometry around a non-human point. Harker rapped her knuckles on the cap, polite testing. The same inward echo answered, the same sense of space bigger than space. She withdrew her hand as if from a hot stove she refused to admit had outnegotiated her. The recorder blipped. The orb dropped 1 inch. So little. So exactly. It felt like a sentence diagram. The cattle line in the distance adjusted a cow's width. Don't. Walter said, too late, because warning the future is an indoor sport. Mara lowered herself and pressed her palm flat to the cap. We're listening, she said, as if auditions were still open for whatever this was. The hum rose. Not loud. Specific. The cap's frost geometry brightened, then pulled away, evaporating into air like ink reversed. The orb rose again, aligning itself with the ridge. One more right angle etched on the day. Okay, Harker said, voice low. Convince me not to call the guard. Call them, Mara said, surprising all 3 of them. They'll come with paperwork and guns, and the thing will become the kind of secret that kills towns. Or, let us test the ridge's throat again. If it sings a missing note, we'll have a conversation with something that refuses to speak in verbs. Harker looked at Walter. Walter looked at the orb. The Raven, bored of democracy, flapped off toward the ridge. "Half an hour," Harker said. "Then I'm the kind of sheriff who makes phone calls." "Half an hour," Mara agreed. They turned the truck toward the caverns. In the rear view, the orb held steady. The cattle took one synchronized step left, like a metronome, and stopped. Back at the cave, the ridge sings on the first try. This time the missing note appears as a 3-frame blink on Mara's camera, a lattice of light assembling over the pasture where the cattle stand, frozen mid-stride. They set up the tripod at the cave mouth. Lens pointed downslope toward the pasture, where beef and geometry cooperated without informed consent. Harker stood aside and radioed in nothing. Her thumb hovered over the transmit like a parent over a hot pan. Mara checked the battery, then checked it again. 3 frames, she said. "Last night something winked. We're going to catch the wink with a faster eyelid." Walter tuned the recorder to the cave's throat like a choir director who had decided to lead a mountain. He found the note by absence, the piece a human mouth cannot shape, and stood clear while the ridge took over. They didn't sing this time. They posed, bodies still, mouth shut, bones offering resonance like a hand extended, your turn, to a partner who knows the steps better. Air cooled. The water film gathered itself like an audience. The first overtones braided. Then the room accepted their offering and did the ancient part, the note that is a size, the chord that is a place. The right angle drew itself on the wall, obedient, bored, hungry. "Hold," Mara whispered to the cave, the town, the day itself. The camera clicked. Frame 1, cattle in line, frost ghosts in the grass. The silo cap a pale coin in the midground, an ordinary morning made photogenic by fear. Frame 2, the pasture occupied by a faint lattice veil, a mesh of light squares, each humming with wrong sunshine, as if someone had draped a blueprint in the air and told the grass to pretend it was a drafting table. Frame 3, the veil gone. A few cows blink. A crow in a high right corner becomes a smear because it refused to hold still for the miracle. Mara lowered the camera and trusted the shaking in her hands. Walter exhaled. Harker swore, without moving her lips. The cave's cord let go, graceful in the way a cathedral is still a cathedral when the choir goes home. "What is that?" Harker asked. "A survey," Walter said. "A quiet one." "But of what?" Harker pressed. "Of us," Mara said. "Not bodies. Placements. Cap, ridge, pasture, dome." We made the note. It draped the grid like a tailor fitting a suit. If we change our stance, the suit changes. Harker chewed on that like fresh ice. "And if we don't like the suit?" "Then we don't sing," Walter said, as if refusing a hymn were a strategy. Channel 9 scratched itself awake. The girl spoke, very near. "If you can see the net, you're already inside it. To change it, answer the question you haven't asked." Mara angled the radio, annoyed that the device had decided to be haunted again without permission. "What's the question?" she demanded. "Which life do you keep?" the girl said. Silence did the arithmetic. Harker looked from the pasture to the ridge to Mara's face and back. "That meant something to you," she said. "It meant something to everyone," Mara said, which was both a dodge and the truth. She reviewed the frames on the little screen, hating the way a miracle reduced itself to pixels without complaint. The lattice was clean. Squares crisp, corners like illuminated pinheads. The grid bent slightly around the silo cap, like fabric around a knee. The cattle? Spaced at markers. Not random. A methodical pattern any rancher would never admit to and any surveyor would clap for. What if it's measuring for a doorframe? Walter said. "Then the question is whether we want a door," Mara said. "Or whether we already open it when we asked if we wanted one." Harker added dryly. Mara pocketed the camera. "Back to the dome," she said. "If the lattice is draping the town, the scope might be drawing a grammar we can read." Harker let the silence vote and then nodded. "I'll make my calls after I know whether our apocalypse speaks English." They drove. In the mirror, the pasture went back to being pasture, which said nothing reliable about what it was doing. Inside the dome, the dormant console wakes by itself and begins sketching a shape no radar should, a rotating polyhedron whose edges correspond exactly to the lattice seen in the pasture. Then the scope prints 4 letters in a row, VVVV. Dust motes rehearsed for a stage light, and then got one when the console warmed. The green glow filled the room's lungs. That old sweep, humanity's favorite rotating finger, came alive, then canceled itself, replaced by a wireframe that would have gotten you laughed out of any debrief, a gently tumbling shape that didn't tumble, a set of edges that remained edges no matter how you looked. Not altitude, range bearing, Walter said, delighted and horrified. Structure. Mara leaned in. The polyhedron refused to settle on a name. Dodecahedrons and icosahedrons and all the solids from high school lined up to audition and were dismissed. This was not a student of Plato. This was its own curriculum. Edges blinked when the pasture lattice would have put a dot. The dots interleaved like chords. The scope drew a filigree along an edge, pause, then wrote 4 slanted marks. Pause for slanted marks. VVV in a machine's handwriting. Band V, Walter said, or the letter V. For times, Mara said, Harker across her arms. What sings in V? Radar bands, sure, Walter said, but also in some publications, V means voice. Mara's mouth went dry. Or vector. Or vote. Channel 9. Because, of course, V means you're very close, the girl said with a rare smile in her voice. Or that you keep writing the wrong alphabet for sky. The scope pulsed, and the polyhedron rose to its own flat plane, without breaking it. That should have made the scope embarrassed. Instead, it made the room colder. The right-angled constellation above the ridge brightened without changing brightness. Context again, always context. Mara tried something foolish and scientific. She turned the radio gain down, then up, as if she could coax the geometry to speak in a language the recorder could swallow. The trace thickened, overtones braided. The console wrote a small square inside a larger square, and then erased a larger square, leaving the small one suspended in implication. Door in door, Walter said. A frame that holds still inside a frame that moves, Mara said, mind pinging off the cave image they'd half-made last night. If we anchor the small frame to the ridge's throat, maybe the big frame doesn't sweep us into the wrong, where... Harker exhaled. We're not going to say when yet, she said, because that will make my next hour impossible. Fair, Walter said. The console beeped in an apologetic way and spit out a narrow strip of thermal paper. The printer hadn't stirred in years. It now offered a heartbeat of letters. VVVV spaced at the same interval as the lights above the ridge. For corners, Mara said. 4 votes. 4 voices. The lattice wants a chorus. You, me, the sheriff, and the ridge? Walter suggested, which would have been funny if the room didn't agree. Mara stared at the polyhedron long enough for it to stop being weird and start being inevitable. We need a 4th, she said. A human 4th that matches a corner we don't own. The teacher, Harker said immediately, Ruth Hale. She's at the drawing from when she was a kid, the one that matches your geometry, like it cheated off her paper. How do you know that? Mara asked. Because I don't throw away reports that sound insane, Harker said. I file them under not yet. The console's wireframe adjusted, as if pleased with their casting choice. One edge brightened. The one that pointed toward the elementary school the town didn't use anymore, but no one had the heart to condemn, because the gym hosted potluck dinners that made you remember you like people. Okay, Mara said, grabbing her coat. We'll try quartet. Try what? Harker asked. Answering, Mara said, at Ruth Hale's house, a box or a child of drawings reveals the exact geometry, including a detail none of them have seen yet. A faint 5th light hovering inside the right angle, labeled in a child's hand. The girl on 9. Ruth Hale had the kind of house that learned tidiness the hard way. Through years of students leaving bits of glitter and glue behind. Through decades of projects that meant the kitchen was also a studio. She opened the door before they knocked a second knock. Apron still on. Hair caught in a pencil as if the pencil had leapt there of its own accord to rescue a thought. Sheriff, she said warmly. Then to Mara and Walter. You're the ones with the dome and the hole. Come in. Wipe your feet. The dog is allergic to nonsense. A golden mix greeted them with committee enthusiasm and sneezed theatrically when Mara tried to pet him. Ruth guided them to a table already covered in paper. Today's project: geometric tessellations in colored pencil, modestly ambitious, heartbreakingly ordinary. Harker got there first. Ruth, remember the sketch from when you were a girl, the one with the 4 lights over the ridge? Ruth nodded, as if a lifetime of quiet had led here on purpose. She bent to a low cupboard and produced a flat box held closed with a ribbon. Within, folders manila and disciplined. She flipped to a labeled tab that made Mara's throat tight. Coldwater Night, 1978. Ruth slid out a page. Cheap kid paper. Graphite and a few streaks of blue. For a light set at a right angle. A faint lattice sketch with a ruler. Under the right angle, in soft child handwriting that took itself seriously. The girl on 9 with an arrow pointing to a 5th, fainter that tucked inside the angle like a secret. You heard her too? Mara asked, trying not to sound like a person being dared back into belief. Oh, yes, Ruth said matter of fact. Some kids heard the hum. I heard her. We had a CB because my daddy hauled lumber. Channel 9 was the town's nervous system. Did you write down what she said? Walter asked, already half knowing the answer. Ruth turned another page. Not words. Music. Or something like it. Bars drawn by a child who knew lines count, but not the names of notes. Dots and rests arranged by ear. Little phrases where the CB voice must have paused to breathe. Mara's eyes prickled. That cadence, she said. It's the ridge's throat. You wrote a cave with a pencil. Ruth smiled like a teacher whose student had just taught her something. Is that where it comes from? She said softly, looking toward the ridge out the window, as if the mountain were an old friend she'd failed to credit properly in the program. The dog sneezed again and lay down with a sigh that accepted miracles as long as kibble came on time. Harker tipped the drawing page back and forth, so the pencil grooves caught afternoon light. What's the 5th light? She asked. Ruth touched the faint inside the angle, tender as an old scar. That was where I stood when I saw it the first time, she said. But I drew it as a light because it felt like one. You were inside the geometry? Mara asked. I was looked at by it, Ruth said, which is not the same as being seen. Mara set her recorder on the table, then didn't turn it on. We need a 4th voice, she said. A human corner that matches a corner the scope keeps advertising. You think my corner fits your song, Ruth said, amused by the poetry of a sentence that would have scandalized the school board in another context. I think you've been harmonizing with it for 47 years, Mara said, whether you wanted to or not. Ruth's laughter landed in the room like a bell. I've been blamed for worse, she said. What do? We go to the cave. We let the ridge sing. We let the town be an instrument in its own right, and we don't look directly at it. Ruth reached for a scarf, a coat, a bag that looked like it had once been a briefcase but now carried pencils and hard candy and a small hammer. I always tell my kids, never look straight at the son of an idea. Look near it. It will come into focus out of politeness. They stepped into air that had chosen to be clear for the first time all day. As they turned toward the trucks, Ruth glanced down and frowned. Snow held 2 shadows beneath her, one where it should be, another skewed a few degrees left, faint and older. I had 2 shadows the first time, too, she said quietly. No one made a joke. In the cavern, with Ruth joining, the cord locks perfectly, and a still frame of noon sky appears as a rigid rectangle hanging in the air. Through it they can see Main Street under bright sun, even though the cave around them is dim and winter late. The cave took Ruth like a choral section, except an alto who knows where Middle C lives. No warm-up, no testing of vowels. She stood in the place the frost geometry liked, inside the right angle, precisely where a child's arrow had pointed 47 years ago, and breathed. Mara didn't sing. None of them did. They placed themselves as if on a stage with marks taped on the floor. Mara opposite Ruth, Walter completing the square, Harker at the mouth watching both the ritual and the law. The ridge obliged. Overtones rose like steam. The missing note arrived without being begged. The frost angle brightened. The little square inside the big one clicked. And then What their outline had promised them, but belief had kept on layaway. A rectangle of noon hung in the cave. Not a portal, not a shimmer, not a movie projected on fog. A clean-edged slab of the town's main street at high sun, pinned in the air like a page held to the wall by 4 careful tacks. Outside the rectangle, the cave remained itself, dim, wet, winter late. Inside, shadows pointed like they do when the day has opinions. No sound crossed, no temperature, but the light meant something, and that meaning carried. They stood quietly, as if a museum guard might shush them. Main Street in the rectangle contained a red pickup parked half a wheel from the curb, 3 servicemen replacing a strand of holiday lights that never got taken down, a boy dragging a sled on gravel, because any gradient is a hill if you believe. The traffic light held yellow, because the town had never taught it to hurry. Harker stepped closer and held up a hand, as if to feel heat that didn't exist. "It's right now," she said. "Or now that we can share," Ruth said. A figure moved within the rectangle. Mara, or not Mara. Someone with her gait, her coat, a phone in her hand. The figure glanced sideways, not at the rectangle, but at something beyond the frame. A second figure crossed the street. A younger Walter, carrying a toolbox like it was lighter than truth. Between them, at knee-height, a dog whose tail wrote insanity in the cold. Harker's knuckles whitened. "That's not today," she said. No. Mara's chest constricted with a pain she had dated and buried, and still fed sometimes because grief is a pet with a long memory. "That's the day the power went out in 15, she said. "Before the town got the new substation. We all met at Maine because the old diner stove would still run, and we fried eggs like it was a depression and told each other we were fine." Walter blinked hard. "I fixed 3 stoves that day," he said, "and broke one." The rectangle held. It was not a window. It was a fact posed in midair. Channel 9 hissed like a sleeping cat. The girl offered a single line. "Don't go through. You can't. Not with bodies." Mara wanted, briefly, with the intensity of a bad idea, to try anyway. The ridge felt that one and fed it back to her as warmth in the hands. A permission that refused to be a dare. "Through without going," Ruth said, remembering the 5th she had drawn in chalk-clumsy childhood. "What if minds can step where feet can't?" "I don't loan my mind to museums," Harker said, half for humor, half for religion. Walter stared not at the rectangle, but at its edges. "It's a frame inside a frame," he said. "If we stabilize the small one, the big one stays still long enough to what? Right on us?" Mara found herself nodding. "Not take us. Induce us. Like the hum. Like the note you can't sing but you can carry in your bones." Ruth's second shadow thickened faintly, like the cave wished to be more honest than optics. "If we step near it," she said, "perhaps it steps near us." They arranged themselves, not closer, but more exact. The rectangle sharpened. The boy with the sled laughed at a joke none of them could hear. The not Mara put her phone down. Something to Real Mara fell in her wrist like a phantom vibration. "Okay," Harker said, voice steady. "We let it write. We do not volunteer to be nouns." Mara half smiled. "Adjectives only," she said. They breathed. The ridge sang. The rectangle held its breath back. And then a not sound moved through them all, a brightening that wasn't light, a sense of numbers arriving like birds returning to a feeder that had finally been refilled. When it passed, they were still themselves. They were also, each of them, in possession of a single integer precise as a scar. Mara's, 19. Walter's, 7. Ruth's, 29. Harker's, -3. -3? Harker said, affronted. "It's not math," Ruth said gently. "It's accounting." "Of what?" Harker asked. But the cave had gone back to being a cave and would only take questions filed under song. As they stepped back into daylight, 47 townspeople are gathered at the trailhead, each claiming they woke up with a number written behind their eyes and dirt under their fingernails. The trailhead had become a town square by accident. Trucks idled respectfully. Boots drew a map of waiting. 47 people formed a loose flock whose grammar was relief. Some were still in pajamas under coats. Some had thought to put on hats. All wore the look. The poster and composure of citizens who had already taken a vote and agreed. We are not going to panic, not in front of the children or the mountain. Harker switched to sheriff with a half-inch lifted chin. Okay, she said, loud enough to be law and low enough to be human. Hands where I can see them, and numbers where you can say them. A small laugh moved the air. One by one, they called out, 12, 44, 0, 5, -1, -8, 31. The integers arrived in no pattern they could love at first glance. Several people rubbed their fingernails unconsciously, each finding the same fine grit in the crescent moons, a dirt that had a depth to it even when it made only a film. What happened? Harker asked. Dream, said a lineman named Corbett. We was 47 of us in the same place, dug into the ridge like a tick to a hound. No tools. No, that's not right. There were tools, but they were numbers. Woke up with this behind my eyes. 22, like it's on a chalkboard I can't erase. A sixth-grade teacher lifted a hand. If this is a survey, she said, who's being counted? And who's doing the counting? Walter kept his mouth shut because he wanted so badly to say us. To both parts that he didn't trust the sentence. Mara climbed the tailgate of a truck like it was a dais. She held up the camera. We caught 3 frames, she said. A lattice over the pasture. It fits the dome's wireframe. The ridge can sing a note we can't. When it does, a rectangle of now hangs in the cave. If you stand near it, you come away with a number that feels like a ledger entry. You're making this worse, Harker muttered, which was true and also the only available mercy. Better an honest bewilderment than a fast lie. Ruth stood at ground level and did her work. Faces, one at a time, with the kindness that sets rooms in order. Numbers can be kindness, she said into the murmuring. They can be burdens, too. Let's not decide which until we know the column headings. A rancher named Marta lifted her hat and scratched the truth under it. If the grid's measuring range, she said, what's the unit? What's closer than near, Mara said without thinking, hearing the outline of a theorem that had kept her out of the fun math classes and in the rooms where radios tell jokes with missing punchlines. You can't be closer than near, a kid said, thrilled to be allowed to argue with town adults. You can if distance isn't the measure, Walter said. If the thing collapses the appearance of distance, then range is something else. Luminous range, maybe. How close you can be without being anywhere. That's illegal, Harker said, mostly to the universe. Corbett squinted up at the ridge. So if I'm a 22, what does that buy me? A seat in the lifeboat? A punch card for miracles? No boats, Ruth said, gentle as wind. Not yet. We need to assemble the ledger and listen to what it's balancing. The crowd adjusted itself. Someone made thermoses appear. Kids compared numbers like baseball cards. 3 dogs took turns showing who was boss and found each other acceptable. Mara's phone buzzed with the excitement of a device that wanted to be the center of every century. A message from an unknown number. VVVV followed by coordinates that did not exist on any map she'd learned in federal buildings. She looked up. Over the ridge, the 4 orbs had resumed their survey, right-angled, deliberate, refusing spectacle in favor of work. The pasture lattice winked once, a 3-frame ghost only the camera could see, but everyone felt their fillings hum. We're not going to chase them, Harker said. We're going to place them, Mara said. We'll triangulate, not distance. But whatever this luminous range is, 2 ridges, 2 tripods, 2 sets of knot measurements. If the object is folding its apparent distance, we'll catch the fold and the overlap. Like measuring thunder with lightning, Corbett offered. Exactly wrong, exactly right, Mara said, and liked him for saying it. They split without being told. A town knows how to divide labor faster than bureaucracy can spell it. In 20 minutes. 2 teams stood on separate high points, tripods leveled by eyeball and prayer. Harker moved between them by radio, her voice giving the day its cadence. Ruth cataloged numbers and faces in a notebook that would one day live in a museum or a shoebox or both. The orbs held. The cameras clicked. When the data came in, clumsy and pure, Mara set the 2 frames side by side on her laptop and overlaid them like an old detective convincing a new one to love maps. The right angle matched on both. Of course it did. But the parallax was wrong in a true way. The object was nearer than near on one axis, farther than far on another, and indifferent to the town's love of rulers. Closer than near, Walter said softly, folding the room. What room? Harker asked. The one we think we live in, Ruth said. Mara pinched and dragged the overlays until the lattice edges kissed. A new shape revealed itself at the join, an almond of overlap in the air above the cemetery hill. A doorframe slice, if you believed in metaphors that cut. That's where it wants us, Mara said. No, Harker corrected. That's where we keep asking to go. The radios popped with ordinary life, batteries complaining, static practicing weather. In the gap between noises, Channel 9 let the girl through, soft as breath on the back of your neck. Don't look straight at it, she said. And when you answer, don't answer for only yourselves. Mara shut her laptop and looked at the town that had chosen to be brave in front of each other. We'll go at dusk, she said. With everyone who wants to stand near and not in, we'll let the ridge sing, and we'll see whether the ledger of bright things wants to be balanced. No one clapped. The temperature dropped a little, then decided to be kind. 47 people went home to find boots and candles and to tell the person they loved most in the world the truth, as if it were a recipe. Simple, exact, forgiving of mistakes. At dusk on the cemetery hill, as the town assembles, the 4 lights align. Then a 5th appears in the center of the right angle for first time, hovering over an unmarked grave whose date is missing. Cemetery Hill was honest land. Wind-worn larch and fir keeping respectful distance from the dead. Stones leaning in slow arguments with freeze and thaw. Families had names here that repeated like hymns. And then there were the unmarked. Unfortunate, unclaimed, or simply forgotten. Stones that were never stones. Depressions soft as sighs. Dates that had fallen off the world. At dusk, the town assembled not like an audience, but like a choir sight reading. Candles, headlamps angled down, flashlights held with 2 hands as if to steady a thought. The 4 orbs arranged themselves above, right angle hanging in the gloaming like a carpenter's, square someone had dared to level against the sky. And in the center, for the first time, a 5th, not bright, not meek, present. It hovered over a patch of earth with no stone, a rectangle of grass that winter had not yet convinced. Ruth Hale opened her notebook. This row, she said, leading them along a string of old surnames, was moved in 1922 when a creek bit off a piece of the hill. The church records say 11 stones, 10 replaced, 1 never carved. Why? Harker asked, because a sheriff is mostly the why of small towns. Money, said the sexton, an old man who owned 3 shovels and 1 good coat. Or a fight, or both. Mara knelt, fingers in the grass, and flinched at the small shock that told her the ground kept current. She set the recorder beside her boot. The hum here had a carefulness, as if the ridge, the orbs, the door-and-door geometry all agreed to whisper where names weren't. They spread out in a simple geometry. For human corners echoing the skies 4, children held at the waist by parents who had practiced being brave in front of them. The 5th light wavered a millimeter, and then held like a promise. Walter unrolled a county survey plat from the 1940s and a cloth copy of the church map from 1899. Layers nested. The lattice trace in the pasture matched the lines of graves like dressmaker chalk. Grid met grief and found they spoke dialects that could be translated. Look, Ruth said, pointing with a pencil. The 4 right-angle corners matched the row leaders, first stones of each family plot. The 5th is not a grave. It's a balance point. A ledger needs a center, Walter murmured. The ledger of bright things, Mara said, and the phrase landed like a tax bill and a pardon at once. The wind rose. The candles guttered, and then decided to behave. Above, the right angle shifted by 1 star's width, then corrected. Bare branches drew geometry on the air. Harker touched the radio on her shoulder, as if to reassure herself it was there. What do we... Oh, she asked the night, and the night had the good manners not to answer too quickly. The hum deepened. The 5th light dipped, no, not dipped, considered. Beneath it, The grass flattened grain by grain, as if a hand pressed it from the other side. The recorder's paper printed a pattern that later Mara would recognize as a palimpsest of names without letters, durations, weights, intersections. The way of life leaves pressure marks on a town. Don't look straight at it, the girl on Channel 9 said, her voice almost tender. If you do, you will make it be only what you think it is. Ruth lifted her face sideways, eyes focused a few inches left of the fifth light. We remember you, she said to the ground, even if we don't know your name. The fifth brightened, barely, like a throat clearing. The four orbs spaced themselves a fraction wider, as if to make room. And the earth beneath the unmarked rectangle exhaled a smell that was not decay and not spring. A library smell. Paper, glue, dust, and the faint sweetness of old flowers crushed between pages. Ledger, Mara whispered. We're standing on an account waiting to be closed. Walter's hand found the green notebook in his coat pocket. He held it without opening it. A man shaking the hand of a future he'd once tried to avoid. Who signs? Harker asked. Not one of us, Ruth said. The fifth light answered, not with brightness, but with a measurable weight on the air. Every candle flame leaned toward it at once. The recorder's trace resolves into a name without letters, a rhythm Mara recognizes from the CB cadence. And when Ruth hums it aloud, a line of frost writes itself out of nothing across the unmarked grave, forming a single, undeniable date. February 11th, 1978. The creek below the cemetery was the town's metronome, small water, keeping time for larger lives. In summer it chattered secrets. In winter it talked to itself under a glass lid and minded its business. Tonight it became an instrument. Word skittered down the hill. You should see the creek. The phrase propagated like sparks that know where the tinder is. People made their way through snow and duff. Candles pinched out, headlamps down. The orb stayed politely above, right angle steady, the fifth still in its balance. The hum did not chase them. It arranged itself along the creek's banks the way sound arranges itself along stories. Mara reached the water first and stopped at the wrongness of motion. Nothing screamed. Nothing crashed. But for 5 heartbeats the creek ran uphill, a smooth, impossible migration of ripples, leaf boats, and the thin skin of light the moon paints on water when it thinks no one is looking. Gravity did not rebel. It paused. Like a pupil listening to a teacher, it suddenly respects. Count, Walter said, voice low. The count came. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on 6, the creek remembered its job and ran down because it was a creek, and that is what creeks do when the world keeps its end of the deal. People breathe the way you breathe after a held note finally resolves. Jokes sidled into throats and decided not to be born. What does it mean? Harker asked. Ruth crouched and dipped a hand. When she lifted it, water clung longer than physics permits, a clear glove thinking about being ringed. The ridge's song is under the town, she said. The creek only seems to obey the surface. 4 or 5 beats. The song told it to remember where it comes from. Where does it come from? The lineman's boy asked, because children always ask the true questions while adults cure it. From a time when this hill wasn't a hill, and this creek wasn't a creek, Walter said. From pressure and patience, and accidents that were inevitable. Mara watched the current skin dimple around a submerged rock. If the ledger is balancing, she said, then those 5 beats are a credit applied to something that was overdrawn. Whose account? Harker said, and the night's politeness held. A woman in her 50s, hair braided tight and practical, stepped forward. My mother, she said. She was born and gone the same day. February 78. We never wrote a stone. The church said they would. Daddy said we couldn't afford it. He said she was with God. God didn't bill. I come here every year and sit on the hill instead. Make do. All eyes went to the fifth light. No one aimed. Everyone angled. The light seemed to nod. The creek reversed again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then let go. In that small pause, a leaf that had insisted on sinking popped to the surface and sailed away like a signed receipt. The woman's face folded into a shape grief makes when it is finally allowed to grow older. Ruth put a hand on her back, not guiding, only witnessing. The sheriff looked at her radio and didn't touch it. Ledger, Mara whispered again, and the word stopped being theory and became a thing you could carry up a hill. They returned to the grave. Frost had written a date. Now it wrote a second line on the first, slow as breath on a window, a small symbol that was not a cross and not a star, 4 dots in a right angle and a faint fifth inside, like a child correction on a teacher's board. Walter felt his heart stumble, corrected his stance, confessed silently to the night that he had always loved the way machines tell the truth by accident. Channel 9, open like a book, whose spine you don't want to break. The girl's voice was closer than radio, farther than memory. Don't look straight at the river when it thinks, she said. You'll tell it how to behave. Harker exhaled in a laugh that had the outline of a prayer. Too late, she said. The fifth light lowered a hand's breadth and held. The town watched and note that was a place make itself comfortable in their air. The frost line under the date finishes drawing and resolves into 4 letters stacked like a signature. VVVV, as the orbs above the ridge begin to turn without turning, and shadows on the hill curve. It started in molars and old brakes, in the screws of knees and the forgotten wire sternums. The note moved. Not louder, closer. The ridge hummed with a frequency you don't hear so much as remember. The way you remember the smell of your first kitchen, or the pitch of your mother saying your name when she wasn't angry. Bulbs in the cemetery's few lampposts dimmed, and then held themselves brave. Radios went from useful to sentimental in a sweep. Someone's analog set battered, stickered, smelling of basements, came to life with a tone that did not belong to AM or FM, to Noah or gossip. The tone braided with the ridge's cord and entered the crowd like weather. People grimaced. Eyes watered. A few laughed out of discomfort and then apologized to no one. The air tasted of copper and the ghost of ozone. A child announced very clearly, I can see my other birthday, and his father took his hand tighter, without looking down. Mara steadied herself against the unmarked grave's cool certainty. The recorder's tape turned with resolve it had not felt in a decade. Its pen drew a forest, then a river, then a sentence. She didn't need the paper. She could feel the syntax in her wrists. It's migrating bands, Walter said, listening with his face. What the dome saw on V, the air is now performing where people can hear it. Band shift, Harker said, chewing the concept. Makes the miracle admissible in small claims court. Ruth closed her eyes. Don't narrate it, she said gently. Let it teach. The tone stepped down half a note. The polite kind of modulation an orchestra does when it hums itself in tune. Conversations around the graves quieted as if a conductor had lifted a hand. For a handful of seconds, no one was the funniest person they knew. Then the memory began. It wasn't images. It wasn't words. It was pressure of time, of choices. People stood on their own personal threshold again. The phone you didn't answer. The apology you never wrote. The job you took because fear told you a story about rent. But the memory was kind tonight. It didn't force. It offered. Mara felt Los Alamos corridors, fluorescence badge taps, the language of certain rooms where secrecy and competence marry for the wrong reasons. She tasted the time she could have told Eliza not to go. She felt it again when she didn't. She recognized that ache as her ledger's overdraft. The number 19 warmed behind her eyes and became not a debt but a vector, a direction in which to balance. Walter's 7 bloomed as an angle. The exact tilt of the dome's beloved sweep, the posture of a man who had chosen work over Christmas twice and had called it duty because that word had been a warm coat when he was young. Ruth's 29 felt like a row of desks, names on paper, a chorus of children pronouncing a new sound together without shame. Harker's -3 arrived as a case file she closed in year 2 because a father had told a good story and a judge had believed it. -3 was the weight of that story measured against what the creek knew. Band shift again. The tone rose. Someone laughed and cried at once, the way you do when you discover you can still do both. Channel 9. Don't look straight at your life, the girl said, almost wry. Look near it. It will come into focus out of politeness. The orbs over the ridge rotated without rotating. Stars near them curved like crumbs on the edge of a plate when you tilt it perfectly horizontal. Time did not stop. It smeared politely and resumed. We're being asked. Mara said through teeth that wouldn't unclench. Not to confess. To answer. Answer what? Harker demanded. Push to the line where skepticism begins to look like prayer. Which ledger entries we can balance now, Ruth said, and which must be carried forward as promises kept in public. The tone stepped down and stopped. No fade, no flourish. The lampposts recovered themselves. Radios described a small storm far away, as if embarrassed to have been important. A quiet fell whose shape was decision. The polyhedron on the dome scope redraws itself in the sheriff's cruiser via dashcam glitch, printing a phrase across the screen in blocky, almost letter shapes. Ask the Skies grammar. Harker's dashcam had seen everything and told the court nothing for 14 years. Tonight, it decided to be a stenographer. When she turned the cruiser key to auxiliary, the screen burped static, then wrote. Not letters. Not quite. Segments arranged themselves into glyphs that, if you squinted sideways with linguist patience, could pass as an alphabet that had married metronome. Mara leaned into the passenger window, breath fogging glass. It's not text, she said. It's timing. She pulled a notebook and drew lines like measures in music. She marked the dash cam's pulses above, the dome's wireframe intervals below, and the ridge's overtones in the margins. Where they touched, a syntax emerged, not grammar in the schoolmarm sense, but in the river sense, a way the current chooses stones. Ruth peered over her shoulder, pencil poised like a baton. Call and response, she said. Anaphony. The 4 lights set the subject. The 5th is the verb. We're the object, unless we reposition ourselves. Walter frowned in a way that meant he loved them both for being right. Objects don't choose. They do if the sentence lets them, Ruth said, and her joy made the dashcam behave even better. Mara mapped pulses to articles, the A to conjunctions, and if to punctuation, the pause that isn't stop, the stop that isn't end. She recognized in the offbeats a girl on 9's breaths, the way human air marks speech even when the words aren't yours to say. The scope at the dome had been scolding them from the beginning. VVVV was not a band only. It was a chorus demanding voices. Harker watched and didn't pretend to follow. Tell me this. Is there a way to mispronounce the sky and make it mad? Yes, Mara said, by yelling nouns at it when it only understands verbs. Ruth tapped a measure. Say we answer, she offered. Not the answer, just that we will answer. Mara marked a short phrase in the Skies grammar, the equivalent of leaning forward without stepping. She passed it to Walter. He read the pulse count, adjusted the tempo, and set his old bones to be a metronome. They practiced on the hood of the cruiser, like musicians who have forgotten to be embarrassed in public. Clicks, taps, whispered vowels. The orbs did not correct them. They waited the way a patient teacher waits for a child to discover the trick of tying their own shoes. The missing note is a place, Mara said, writing the oldest sentence of the night again. So the answer has to include a where sung by a who. Then the ridge must speak, Ruth said, and so must we. Harker closed her eyes briefly and saw 3, then 2, then 1 case that had chosen her instead of the other way around. Let's do it where the town can hear itself, she said. At the square. We'll ring the bell. We'll tune radios. We'll not issue a permit. Breaking the law is still my job, Mara said. Writing it, too, Harker replied. They moved. Word outran tires. By the time they reached Maine, the crowd had reconvened. The diner was open without power because someone had brought a generator that only ran when you wanted eggs. The traffic light blinked yellow thoughtfully. Above, the right angle held position, as if the sky had committed to a pose. Ruth took the steps of the old courthouse like a conductor mounting the podium for a piece she had loved since girlhood. Mara passed out the simple grammar. 4 pulses, a breath, 3, a breath, 2 plain strikes to mark we rather than me. Walter tuned 3 battered radios to receive with their hearts instead of their dials. Harker posted deputies at the edges to catch panic if it tried to slip in. Cold water. Ruth said, voice carrying like good bread smell. We're going to try answering. Not asking for rescue. Not declaring war. Not begging for proof. Just, we hear you. We'll try to speak in your grammar. If you get a number, hold it like you would a sleeping child. If you get a memory, Don't correct it. If you get nothing, you are still here, which is already more than enough. The town was quiet and loud at once. Boots shifting, kids being briefed on reverence by example. Somewhere, a dog shook off a bath it hadn't taken. Mara raised a hand. For pulses rolled through the square. Soft drum on a truck bed. Click a baton on railing. Tap on glass, breath. The ridge answered. The missing note unfolded gently, like a letter that's been waiting in a drawer for decades. The orbs brightened without blinding. The fifth flickered and held. The dash cam in Harker's cruiser wrote a new glyph that was so definitely a question mark no one argued. As the town holds a pattern, the sky mirrors it, but with one note missing that human throats can't make. The ridge tries to supply it, and fails. A tremor runs underfoot, and the right angle wobbles for first time. It was a small failure. Half a hair's breadth, a quarter beat late. But when a mountain misses, humans feel it as fate. The missing note, the place note, stuttered. The ridge reached. The cave's throat tried to tighten into the size that would make the sky smile, its unseen smile, and could not. The fifth light flickered in a way that looked like mercy and felt like accounting. Hold. Ruth said softly, hands down like a conductor coaxing a fragile pianissimo. Don't rush. Don't fix it. Let the room correct itself. Mara swallowed the reflex to compensate. To lean harder, to pound the table of the world until it lined up, she breathed. She recalled the 3 frames. Pasture lattice, draped net, door in door. She remembered the unmarked grave writing itself a date and a signature it had deserved all this time. She remembered Eliza's last text and chose to not look straight at it. The town sustained the pattern. Radios throbbed. Bells in the hands of children chimed on the offbeat, because that is where hope fits. The diner's generator hiccuped and then became a colleague. Under their boots, the creek rehearsed running uphill and decided to wait. Harker felt -3 behind her eyes, not a negative so much as a promissory, something she would put right in daylight where it counts. She lifted her chin and found the square's particular pitch. The sigh of buildings, the hum of heaters cooling, the 1,000 micro-sounds that make a town be itself when no one's performing adulthood at it. Walter took the stick Mara offered and tapped twice on the courthouse railing. The sound he had always mistaken for small. The ridge heard it. The cave agreed. The missing note leaned in, almost there. Let them sing it, Ruth said, gaze sliding to the mouths of people who had learned to be quiet in public. Not the Four Corners. All of us. Don't sing the pitch. Sing the place, each from where you stand. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. Coldwater answered. Not in unison, never that. In consensus. A wash of voices, some tuned to a memory of hymns, some to the rough beauty of bar songs, some to lullabies, some to the vowel hum humans make when they are fixing fences or folding sheets. The sound was made of nearness. It carried the grammar they had learned, for pulses, breath, 3 breath, and a long lean into where. The ridge caught the gift. The cavern mouth took it the way a well takes a coin and returns you a wish without receipts. For a moment so short it required faith to call it long. The missing note arrived. The room became the size the sky had asked for. The place became a pitch. The ledger's balance sheet tiled itself in green. The right angle steadied. The fifth light glowed like frost catching first dawn. Mara felt 19 rotate in her, not as a penalty but as a map. 19 things to do, 19 people to call, 19 lies to retire. Walter's 7 settled into his spine like good posture. Ruth's 29 unfolded into 30 desks and 1 window that would always be cracked because fresh air is not a luxury. Harker's -3 flipped to +3, with a clean accounting move only she could make. File reopened, apology rehearsed, visit planned. The dash cam glyph changed again, a 3-stroke verb they would later translate badly as to hold open without prying. And then the sky asked again. The 5 lights did not brighten. They waited. The square sound sagged as voices found the limit of breath. You cannot hold a note forever, not even if a mountain helps. Mara lifted her hand for silence, then for listening. We have to place the note, not carry it, she said, understanding at last. The ridge can't hold it alone. The town can't either. The door has to. The small frame, Walter said, remembering the wireframe inside the wireframe. Ruth nodded. "Back to the caverns," she said, "where the whole towns were inside it." Harker's radio crackled. A deputy's voice in the civilized language of duty. "Ma'am, the orbs are dropping by a foot. 2 feet. Sheriff, they're waiting." The fifth light slid a palm's breadth toward the cemetery hill and stopped above the unmarked grave with the new date. Everyone angled their eyes away, and in that merciful tilt the light agreed. "Coldwater," Ruth called, her voice both bell and blanket. "Bring your numbers. Bring your where. We're going to make a room big enough for a note to live in." No one asked for a permit. Back in the caverns, as the town packs into the stone throat, the right-angle frost returns. But this time a rectangular still frame of sky hangs inside a second, smaller frame. The door and door finally forming, and a hush falls as the first names begin to write themselves in light across the ledger wall. The caverns had never held this many people. Breath fogged the limestone. Lanterns jittered shadows. Boots shuffled on rock worn smooth by centuries of water that had been patient before it had been music. The Ridge's throat had accepted quartets before. 2 voices for voices, a handful of stubborn listeners. Now it was asked to hold an entire town. Mara set the recorder against a stalagmite already trembling in anticipation. Walter strung 2 extension cords from generators, feeding light that buzzed against a natural hum. Ruth Hale cleared her throat and raised her arms, not as a conductor, but as a teacher about to quiet 30 children, without clapping once. "The grammar is simple," she said. 4 pulses, breath. 3 pulses, breath. Then place yourselves as you are. Don't force pitch. Don't try to match. Just exist where you stand. The frost geometry obligingly returned to the cavern wall. Right angle for dots, the faint fifth tucked inside. Above it shimmered the faint suggestion of a rectangle, a still frame aperture that had flirted with permanence. Tonight it thickened at the edges, like glass about to remember how to be a window. They began. Not music. Placement. Boots on stone. Lungs on air. Vowels not so much sung as released. The ridge caught them. Caverns amplified them. Overtones braided like vines. The missing note hovered just outside reach. Close enough to taste as copper. Too far to drink. Closer. Mara whispered. Not louder. Nearer. The crowd adjusted. Some leaning back. Some bowing heads. Some lifting children. The still-frame rectangle flickered, then duplicated itself inside. A smaller, sharper door drawn with frostlight. "That's it," Walter said, astonished. Door and door. But the note itself still refused. It trembled like an animal at the threshold of being named. "Because it isn't sound," Ruth said, almost laughing the obvious. "It's where we've been trying to sing it. We have to stand it." She moved 3 paces left. Her second shadow followed. The rectangle sharpened, edges crisp. Someone else shifted to the back wall. A family stepped closer to the dripping stone. Each new stance folded the room's shape toward a geometry it had always been waiting to admit. The missing note entered, not through ears, but through soles of boots, palms on stone, shoulders pressed against old calcite. The K became the right size, the right where the note was never absent. The town had simply been standing in the wrong place. Light bled along the frost angle, brightened into a frame, then a frame inside the frame. The rectangle of noon sky returned, clearer than ever, showing Main Street in sunlight, though outside the cave it was midnight. But this time words, names, began writing themselves across the wall in pale blue flame. Not carved, not projected. Balanced. Names of the living, names of the dead, names with stones, names without. The ledger had opened its first page. As the names scroll, 47 townspeople gasped together. They all see their numbers written beside their names, as if the ledger had always kept score. The wall shone like a chalkboard lit from behind. Names arrived in delicate handwriting, but no hand wrote them. Each was paired with its number. Mara Ellison, 19. Walter Crane, 7. Ruth Hale, 29. Lorraine Harker, -3. Then the crowd. Marta Ruiz, 12. Corbett James, 22. Helen McKee, 0. Dozens more. until every voice in the cave found itself acknowledged in light. Gasps multiplied. Some reached for the names with trembling hands, only to find light warm as breath but untouchable. Others bowed heads as if seeing an exam graded by a teacher both strict and merciful. The missing note sustained itself, not as sound but as shape. The cave throat vibrated, stalactites quivering in sympathy, droplets falling in perfect rhythm. Instruments brought from the high school band room, an old trombone, a cracked violin, a drum patched with duct tape, trembled against their cases though no one touched them. "It's the ridge," Walter said, while softening his voice. "The throat of stone is resonating, correcting us when we falter. The missing note isn't ours to sing. It's the land's." Mara traced her name with a finger, resisting the urge to claim it. "If it's balancing the ledger," she murmured, "then 19 isn't punishment. It's the vector, a responsibility." Harker scowled at her own -3 glowing faintly above the crowd. "So I'm a deficit?" she asked. Ruth touched her shoulder. "No, you're a promise waiting to be redeemed." The frostlight shifted, and the frame within frame thickened, showing not Main Street anymore but the ridge itself, viewed from above, as if the cave were looking at its own crown. Snow glittered. The 4 lights hung in their familiar right angle, the 5th pulse at the center. Then, impossibly, a 6th appeared, hovering beneath the others, like a bass note finally daring to join a chord. The cave groaned. Stone moaned like a ship's hull under stress. Dust drifted from cracks. Children whimpered until parents bent low and hummed reassurance into their hair. The stone throat was not only singing, it was shifting. "Hold your places," Ruth said, steady as bedrock. "Don't try to fix the note. Let the ridge become the instrument it wants to be." The ledger wall brightened, names glowing harder, as if underlined. Then a new line wrote itself. No name, only 4 letters. "Open." The 6th light outside burst brighter, and the frame inside the cavern stopped flickering, becoming a rigid door sky-frozen mid-turn, impossible and waiting. No one breathed for the first seconds. The rectangle hung midair like a photograph pinned against stone, a slice of the ridge outside, but caught in an impossible motion. The sky above it seemed to rotate, yet the stars did not spin. The whole frame turned without turning, like a card held flat, and flipped through a dimension human wrists didn't own. Time hiccuped. Watches ticked stuttered beats. Lantern flames curved sideways. Shadows bent along the cave walls, stretching like rubber pulled by invisible fingers. Children laughed nervously at their own elongation, then stopped when their parents didn't. "This is the long turn," Walter whispered. "The object's rotating us without moving itself." The 6th light outside aligned with the 5th, creating a vertical line through the right angle. Geometry had stopped being polite. It was rewriting itself in front of them. Mara's recorder squealed as its tape accelerated beyond mechanical limits, then stopped dead. The pen ripped across paper in a single vertical slash. She tore it free and held it up, a line, stark and absolute, like the simplest coordinate in the world. Up. The ledger wall flickered. Names wavered. Numbers danced. For an instant, everyone saw different digits beside their own name. Possible futures, unpaid balances, accounts still open. Then the numbers settled back to their originals, as though the system had tested every option and chosen mercy. "Closer than near," Mara said, trembling. "It's folding the map, making our distances irrelevant. The turn is a hinge." Ruth clutched her old drawing to her chest. "If the door turns too far, it will close again. And this ledger will be an archive, not a transaction." Harker steadied herself against the wall. Her second shadow appeared faintly beside her, like Ruth's had before. "How do we hold it?" she asked. The ledger responded with a single new entry written across the bottom. 47. All heads turned. 47 people in town had woken with numbers. 47 were marked. 47 would be required. The 6th light pulsed once, twice. The door inside the cave steadied, asking silently for its quorum. As the townspeople gather, a tremor shudders through Coldwater Ridge. Then every clock in town skips forward 1 hour, while their memories remain intact. At first no one noticed. The diner lights hummed, the jukebox still sulked in the corner, and the traffic light at Main and Bell flickered as usual. But then the first phone buzzed, an alarm chirping when it shouldn't. A wristwatch ticked out of rhythm with the church bell. The dashboard clocks in 3 parked trucks blinked the same absurd number. One by one, voices rose in complaint. Cell phones, watches, dashboard clocks, all disagreed in the same way. 1 hour ahead. Every device, digital or analog, mechanical or electric, insisted that midnight had become 1 a.m., but no one could remember the intervening 60 minutes. It was as if time had been sliced clean away. People swore. They shook their devices, tapped screens, wound dials backward to test the error. But the result was always the same, 1 o'clock. Even the diner's ancient wall clock, its yellowed face stained with decades of coffee steam, had betrayed them. The thing had been ticking longer than half the town had been alive, stubbornly keeping its own kind of crooked accuracy. And yet tonight, it stood with the others, its hands together at 1 o'clock, as though embarrassed to admit it had also skipped. "We lost an hour," Harker said flatly, her voice cutting through the rising chatter. "No," Walter corrected, his voice taut but reverent. "We loaned it." The Ridge groaned in polite confirmation, as though amused at the phrasing. Dust sifted down from the cavern ceiling. The rectangle of the door shimmered faintly, wavered like a reflection on water, then steadied once more. Above the cavern, the 6 lights adjusted their spacing. Slowly, gracefully, they slid into a new formation, clicking into alignment like cogs meshing in some invisible machine. Their glow pulsed in perfect rhythm. The ledger wall brightened on the line marked 47. Its glow surged and faded like a heartbeat too large for the cavern to hold. The names etched there, every marked soul, throbbed in sympathy, as if the wall itself had inhaled their breaths. Mara staggered, pressing her palm to her temple as her 19 flared behind her eyes. It wasn't pain. It was instruction, a task unspoken but certain. 19 things she owed, not only to the Ridge, not only to the sky, but perhaps also to herself. 19 acts of repayment. Ruth clutched her 29 against her chest, as though it were a lesson plan she had written long ago and forgotten to deliver. The weight of responsibility pressed her spine straighter. Walter whispered 7 under his breath, over and over, like a rosary bead clicking between fingers. Each repetition steadied him, a prayer of mechanical rhythm. And Harker ground her teeth against the weight of -3, fury and resolve tangling together. She swore to flip it before dawn, to turn subtraction into surplus, loss into reclamation. "What happens?" Marta Ruiz asked suddenly, her voice trembling as it echoed against the cavern walls. "If we don't repay the hour?" The question stopped every breath in the cavern. The answer came from everywhere at once. The girl on Channel 9, her voice thin and certain, spoke through every radio, every speaker, every forgotten wire. Even those who had no device heard her, as if she sat behind their eyes. Then the hour becomes theirs, and so does what you loved in it. The word struck harder than thunder. People exchanged panicked glances. Which hour? From when? What would be taken? A birthday kiss? A final goodbye? A child's first cry? Mara closed her eyes, and the memories surged unbidden. Eliza, laughing in a kitchen long gone, her cheeks dusted with flour, sunlight cutting gold through the curtains. It could have been any hour, but her marrow knew. It was that one. That was the hour the Ridge had borrowed. She felt it with a certainty sharper than grief, and she swore in her bones that she would pay 19 tasks to earn it back. The town decided as towns do, not with ballots, not with permission slips, but with the silent alignment of hearts already leaning the same way. Together, without needing to speak it aloud, every one of the 47 marked souls stepped forward into a circle inside the cavern. Each walked to their place as if they had rehearsed the pattern for lifetimes. Boots scuffed against the floor, shoulders squared, eyes lowered in reverence and fear. The Ridge thrummed beneath them like an organ finding its key. The door's rectangle steadied. The 6th light above pulsed faster, its rhythm urgent, like a coin dropped on a counter demanding to be spent. The ledger wall scrolled new fire across the glowing names, burning with command. Now, and that night, when exhaustion finally folded their bodies into restless sleep, every marked soul dreamed the same dream. They dreamed of digging into the ridge with their bare hands. Fingers clawed through frozen stone, fingernails snapping, palms bleeding. But beneath the stone, their hands found warmth. They found shards of glowing lattice buried, like roots of some unearthly tree. The shards hummed like live wires, singing equations into their bones. They pulled the lattice free, one piece at a time, cradling it like fire stolen from a jealous god. And every single one of them woke, gasping, dirt crammed under their nails. The ridge had made its loan, and now it waited for repayment. Morning found Coldwater Ridge strangely peaceful. Snow fell in polite handfuls. The lights above held steady, 6 in their strange geometry, waiting. But the town did not wake rested. 47 people rose with grit beneath their fingernails and dirt ground into the half-moons, as though they'd worked all night. When they gathered in the diner, they discovered the same dream told in different voices. A pit dug into the ridge. Bare hands clawing stone that gave way like soft earth. Shards of lattice pulled free, each glowing faintly, each whispering numbers not yet learned. They stacked the shards into a shape they couldn't name. Then they woke, with nails dirty and hearts unsettled. The ledger wall in the cavern confirmed it. Beneath 47, a new glyph glowed, the outline of the very lattice they had dreamed. It wasn't a dream, Rue said, pressing soil from her cuticles with a tissue. It was the ledger writing through us. Harker held up her own hands, grim and practical. So we're the workers, the survey crew, or the accountants, Mara said, balancing a ledger we didn't open but are responsible for now. The ridge hummed faintly in agreement. The 6th light above pulsed 3 times, then waited. What next? Marta Ruiz asked. Channel 9 hissed, then cleared. Open the lattice. The crowd shivered. Words without context could ruin you, but these came with gravity that silenced protest. Walter lifted his green notebook, hands shaking. It's the same instruction we saw at the dome. Open, but not doors, not files, the lattice itself. Mara nodded, grim. Then tonight, we return to the caverns. All 47. We stand where the ridge can sing. We let the shards we carried in sleep become the frame. The ledger wall brightened, underlining 47, as if approving the plan. The missing note hovered, ready but not yet released. Coldwater Ridge was no longer waiting. It was demanding. That night, when the ridge sings, the lattice assembles into a glowing scaffolding across the cavern, an impossible door waiting to be stepped through. The caverns pulse like lungs, slow, tidal, ancient. The walls sweated frost that breathed in rhythm with the people gathered there, as the stone itself had grown arteries and veins. 47 voices took their places, each stepping onto the notches worn into the ground. Not by tools, but by repetition across forgotten centuries. No one had to tell them where to stand. Their dream shards had carried instructions, secret coordinates that hung behind their ribs until the moment of alignment came. Mara felt her 19 hum in her bones, a vibration that refused to stay inside her body, ringing out into the cavern floor. Walter braced himself around the harsh cut of 7, his breath short, like he was pushing against invisible pressure. Ruth steadied her voice around 29, singing a vowel that did not exist in any language. And Harker's -3 glowed like a death note waiting to be erased, a subtraction hungry for release. The ridge began to sing, but it wasn't sound. It was placement, boots against stone, shoulders aligning, breath falling into rhythm. The geometry of bodies wove together, forming grammar stolen from the sky itself. It wasn't heard in the ears, but felt in the spine, a chorus of precision. The frost angle returned, cutting a line across the cavern. The frame inside the frame sharpened, as though a camera were focusing on a lens that had always been there. And then something impossible occurred. The lattice they had dreamed of began to build itself, strand by strand, in hard white light. It rose like scaffolding, an architecture of equations, geometry incarnate. The shards of their dreams fitted together like pieces of loom finely threaded, each number snapping into place like beads on a rosary. Light bent, flexed, folded, until the cavern's empty center was no longer empty. The door appeared, not a shimmer, not a wavering mirage, but a rigid rectangle, a still frame of sky torn from the flow of time, nailed in place by unseen hands. Its edges glowed like frost catching sudden sunlight, while its interior showed nothing, yet everything, a silence that had weight, a texture like velvet rubbed against the grain. Looking into it was like remembering something you hadn't yet lived. Walter whispered first, reverent, unable to stop himself. Door in door. Channel 9. No one ever saw him speak, only felt his voice, whispered back through marrow and nerve. Don't step. Don't push. Let your minds go where your bodies can't. The ledger wall responded. It flared open like a book of flame. Names etched into it began to glow brighter. 47 of them, while their numbers pulsed in synchrony with the lattice. At the bottom, new letters crawled in pale blue fire, writing themselves into stone like a living script. The door stands still. Coldwater Ridge had opened. The chamber smelled of iron and ozone, like lightning trapped in stone. Breath clouded. The pulse of the cavern became indistinguishable from the pulse of the 47. And in the silence that followed, each of them felt the same truth. They were not opening a passage. They were being opened. The question pressed in, sharp as ice. Would anyone or anything answer? The lattice stabilized, its strands trembling like harp strings caught in eternal resonance. And then the impossible rectangle flickered, not breaking, not collapsing, but revealing. The frozen surface began to show more than silence. At first, only the hint of a street. Bricks, half-formed, caught in amber light. Then lampposts. Then the recognizable outline of shops and windows. It was Main Street, but frozen. Every figure, every car, every loose scrap of newspaper caught mid-flight was locked in stasis. Time had been sliced open and nailed to the wall of the cavern. They could see the street's wind, but it did not move. They could see a man caught mid-step, but his foot never touched the ground. And outside the cavern, beyond Coldwater Ridge, the rest of the world kept moving. The 47 stood there, each one trembling, not from cold but from recognition. They weren't looking at a vision. They were looking at a theft of reality. A piece of the world had been pulled into the door, stripped of motion, framed as offering. And somewhere deep in the silence, something else began to breathe back. The rectangle didn't flicker. It didn't breathe. It simply held. It was not a screen, nor a mirror, nor a portal. It was an anchor hammered into the wall of the cavern, and through its rigid edges the world had been nailed into place. Main Street at noon stood inside it like a photograph tacked against eternity. Cars were caught mid-roll, the shadows of their tires hovering a hair above the asphalt. A child hung mid-laugh, her mouth open but her breath forever trapped in amber. Flags mid-flutter strained at breezes that would never complete their gesture. Leaves seemed alive, yet each vein and serration was carved like marble. The sky itself looked like glass, painted with clouds that refused to slide. Inside the rectangle, time had been denied permission. Outside the rectangle, in the cavern, time carried on. Lanterns guttered with their usual impatience. The gathered people shifted their boots against the stone floor. Children, who had been forbidden to speak too loudly, whispered behind their parents' shoulders. The walls breathed frost. Their own pulses beat against their ribs. The world of breath and sound and heartbeat continued, but the world in the rectangle had been placed on hold, like a note cut out of a song. Mara's eyes widened until they shone like two wet stones. "It's a still frame," she said, voice quivering with awe. A slice of the world caught in suspension. Not erased, just pause. Walter tilted his head, counting as he always did, lips moving around numbers no one else heard. "The big door turns," he said at last, as if confirming an equation. "But the small one anchors. That's why it doesn't smear, why it doesn't collapse. It pins reality like an insect in a display box." Ruth touched her chest. Her second shadow, the one only she could feel, stood steady behind her, mirroring her posture with unwavering patience. "It's not a trick," she whispered. "It's an invitation. To observe without intrusion, to see through without going, to know without touching." And the ledger wall, as if listening, agreed. New glyphs scrolled across its stony surface. They were not written in ink or etched in fire, but burned into perception itself. Rough translations tumbled through the watchers' minds, shaping in their thoughts rather than their ears. The glyphs read like commandments, like apologies, like instructions given too late and too carefully. Hold still. Witness. Do not pry. The crowd hushed further. Some swore they felt the words settle inside their bones, like bones themselves had been replaced by scripture. Above them, the fifth light pulsed once. The sixth dimmed slowly, not extinguished or conceding, as though acknowledging the moment with a bow. The cavern inhaled with the sound of stone, under pressure. Harker clenched her fists until the leather of her gloves creaked. "So, what is this, then?" she spat, bitterness roughening her throat. "Our prize is a photograph? We lose an hour of ourselves. We wake with dirt crusted under our nails. We stand in formation until our legs shake. We sing until our throats break. And all for this? Just to watch." Her words cracked against the walls like a thrown hammer. A few nodded nervously. A few looked to the ground. Doubt is contagious in caverns. But Ruth stepped forward, her voice calm, her shoulders steady as a teacher correcting a child. "Not watch," she said, with a gentleness that was sharper than scorn. "Witness. Different verbs. Different duties." The words hung, and for the first time, the crowd understood the difference. To watch is to consume. To witness is to testify. The rectangle shimmered once, not with heat, but with clarity. Its edges sharpened, its contents deepened. And then came the gasp, low, collective, unstoppable. Because inside the still frame were not only the town's familiar shapes, not only the cars, the child, the flag, there was also themselves. Every one of them. 47 figures frozen on Main Street, looking skyward, faces pale, eyes wide. And above them, caught forever in that held sky, hung 6 lights. Not stars, not lanterns. 6 lights with weight and purpose. The onlookers in the cavern reeled. Their bodies were here, breathing, blinking, shifting in the half-dark. Yet there they were also, fixed inside the rectangle, immortal in stasis. Both truths existed simultaneously, and neither canceled the other. Mara touched the stone, as if steadying herself. Walter stopped counting for the first time in hours. Ruth's lips parted in reverence. Even Harker went silent. The ledger pulsed again. Blue fire flared brighter than ever, writing a new phrase across the wall. Through without going. The words pulsed once, then steadied. And then it began, one by one, as if summoned by invisible strings. The people in the cavern felt their minds step forward. Not their feet, not their hands, but their minds. Thought slipped free of flesh and drifted into the rectangle, into the frozen frame. Their bodies remained where they were, standing, breathing, shifting in the dark. But their awareness, their essence, crossed into Main Street. They became double. Here, in the cavern. There, in the frame. And when they returned, stumbling as if from a dream, each carried back something pressed against their palm, against their heart, against their soul. A number, precise, undeniable, glowing with meaning. Mara's 19. Walter's 7. Ruth's 29. Harker's -3. And the others, all 47, each holding the integer that defined them. Not debts, not punishments, not chains, but currencies. The ledger wall glowed, tallying each return, as though the account of the living had been updated. And Coldwater Ridge whispered its truth again, louder this time. Through without going. It began as vertigo, not the kind that topples a person, but the kind that lifts the floor away and leaves the body walking on memory alone. First a flicker behind the eyes, then a drift, a slow slide to the marrow. People swayed in place, boots scraping against the cavern stone, yet none of them fell. Their bodies remained rooted, lungs drawing air, hearts steady as drums. But their minds, their minds stepped elsewhere. They stepped directly into the still frame. The rectangle had been waiting. Mara was the first to feel it. One moment she was shivering in her parka, frost crusting the fur of her hood. The next, she felt the sudden jolt of sunlight on her bare skin. Warm, alive, impossible. She raised her hand, but saw both at once. Glove and no glove, cavern and street, body and ghost body. She was on Main Street, yet it was not her main street. It was a frozen one, the arrested picture, the frame inside the frame. And she saw herself. She saw Mara standing in the cavern, boots set, shoulders squared. And she also saw Mara standing here, in the captured stillness of town. Both were true. Both were her. In her palm appeared the integer she had carried so long in the dark. 19. It was not ink. It was not sound. It was not even light. It was simply there, undeniable. It burned in her like an organ. And with it came understanding. 19 was not an accident. 19 meant 19 choices she had deferred, 19 balances she had been assigned, 19 weights resting on her shoulders. Some she remembered, some she had not yet lived, but all 19 demanded to be addressed. Walter staggered as his vision split the same way. He still felt the ache in his knees from kneeling in the cavern, but now he stood on frozen pavement. Cars hovered mid-break. Exhaust arrested into sculpture. He too saw his number, not above him, not around him, but inside him. 7 sharpened into unbearable clarity. 7 machines he had left unfixed. 7 quiet omissions. 7 failures where his hands had not turned the wrenches they could have. Each one awaiting debt. 7 people who might have been spared pain or danger if he had acted. 7 debts that breathed like cogs without oil, grinding in silence. He clenched his fists and the 7 pulsed, not condemning, not accusing, but reminding. Ruth walked slower into the freeze, her breath clouding though the air here was not cold. She touched the integer that now hovered in the shape of her own breath. 29. It unfolded in front of her, not as a number, but as 29 desks, 29 names on chalkboards, 29 lessons she had meant to teach but postponed, deferred, lost to fatigue or hesitation. 29 minds she had not yet sharpened. 29 promises hanging unfinished, like books with their last chapters unwritten. She whispered each lesson, as though the air could catch them. The still street carried them into windows, into paper, into shoelaces and lampposts. And the ledger glowed faintly in reply. And Harker, always Harker. His number was the strangest, the most unwelcome, and yet the truest. -3. It vibrated against him like a case file tossed onto his desk too many years ago, left unopened, marked pending until pending turned into forgotten. -3. 3 lives lost when he had looked away. 3 sentences left unspoken when they could have mattered. 3 mistakes that still gnawed like rats in a drawer. But in the still frame, the -3 did not scold. It hummed like a question mark. It offered, almost tenderly, what if a minus could be reversed? What if every debt is an invitation to subtract the silence? And all across the cavern, 43 others felt the same splitting, the same double seeing. Each marked soul stepped through without stepping, stood on the halted street of Maine, and returned carrying their integer with new gravity. The cavern filled with a hum of numbers suddenly revealed in their true forms. Choices, balances, obligations, promises, gifts. The ledger wall flared brighter than ever. Every name underlined, every number attached now to a glowing check mark, as though accounts had been updated. For the first time, the cavern felt not like a chamber of judgment, but like a bookkeeper's desk. Rows reconciled, debts balanced against futures. And then Channel 9 spoke, not from the air, not from the walls, from inside their ribs. Do not hoard the numbers. Do not clutch them like talismans. They are not burdens. They are not debts. They are currencies. The ledger is not punishing you. It is asking, how will you spend what you owe? How will you spend what you carry? The words passed through marrow, and each of them trembled. Mara gasped as she returned fully into her own skin, back in the cavern, boots pressing stone again. Her voice broke free. They're not debts, she said, eyes wide. They're currencies. They're tools. The ledger isn't here to punish. It's asking how we'll use what we carry. Walter nodded slowly, though tears welled in his eyes. Ruth whispered numbers like prayers. Harker laughed once, sharp and bitter, and then softer, because even -3 was not exile. Even -3 had been given as coin. And then, before their eyes, the ledger wall began to scroll again. Its fire dimmed from accusation into instruction. Words uncoiled across its stone in pale blue flame, patient and precise. The ledger of bright things. The cavern hushed. The wall began to tally not only debts but salvations. Lives saved and lost along Coldwater Ridge. Choices spent wisely, choices squandered, choices waiting. Each integer pulsed as it tied itself into threads of consequence, weaving a tapestry visible only when the whole wall was read at once. And they understood, with a chill deeper than any frost. They were not only being measured, they were being invited to measure, to turn their lives into bright currency, to spend themselves into the shape of an answer. The wall was no longer pale blue. It blazed white gold, lines of light scrolling like a terminal alive with infinite accounts. Lives balanced, accidents prevented, rescues achieved, kindnesses multiplied. Opposite them, losses weighed heavy. Deaths in the mine collapse of 42. Children claimed by flu in 18. Soldiers who had left and not returned. Each entry bore a glow, dim for sorrow, bright for salvation, steady for those yet unresolved. The ledger's title shone above it all, the ledger of bright things. Mara traced a column under her own name. 19 balanced against choices she had dodged. Some were dim, some still open. 1 or 2 glowed with an intensity that hurt. Walter touched his line, 7, and saw the 7 machines, yes, but also 7 people alive because of small, unseen decisions. A radio fix in 79, a fuse replaced in 84, a storm night where he'd stayed awake too long and caught a surge before it killed 3. Ruth's 29 lined up as children's names, students who had gone on to lives she never knew, each glowing softly as if the ledger had remembered them on her behalf. Harker's -3 was harder. 3 names, 3 choices not made. But now, beneath them, faint new columns appeared, empty but waiting. A promise ledger. Debts that could be flipped. The townsfolk wept openly, some with joy, some with grief, all with the understanding that their lives were being accounted for, not by a God they prayed on Sundays, nor by a government that filed taxes, but by the ridge itself, by the geometry that had chosen to speak in lights and grammar and missing notes. Channel 9 breathed into every radio. Answer, not with words, with the missing note, one last time. The ridge groaned. The 6 lights pulsed together. The ledger wall blazed. The town prepares to sing one last time, the missing note that only the ridge can hold. But this time, the choice of what answer to give rests entirely with them. The cavern hushed. Children pressed into parents, not afraid but reverent. Lanterns flickered as if bowing. The ledger wall stood ready, the title bright above. The ledger of bright things. Ruth lifted her arms. Coldwater, she said, we've been asked a question all along. Not do you believe? Not do you fear? The question is, what will you carry forward? The grammar was ready. For pulses, breath, 3 breath, the ridge's throat prepared itself. The townsfolk inhaled. This time there was no hesitation. They didn't try to sing the missing note. They stood it. Each number became placement. Each life became a vector. Each grief, each kindness, each promise yet to be kept. They all arranged themselves into geometry the sky had demanded. The ridge sang. The cavern answered. The missing note arrived, not through throats but through presence. The still frame door glowed white. The lattice scaffold brightened. The 6 lights above aligned in one last, perfect chord. And then silence, not absence. Completion. The ledger wall dimmed, not erased, but archived. Names lingered faint, no longer screaming for balance, only remembered. The 5th light winked once. The 6 folded into it, and together they rose into the sky, leaving the right angle behind like chalk wiped from a board. Mara felt 19 choices reweigh themselves inside her, still hers, but now gifts instead of debts. Walter's 7 became resolve. Ruth's 29 became a lesson plan she would never stop teaching. Harker's -3 flipped quietly to +3. The girl on Channel 9 spoke once more, soft as breath. Don't look straight at it. Look near, and keep answering. Then static, above Coldwater Ridge, the sky returned to ordinary stars. The hum quieted. The dome slept. The creek ran downhill, unapologetic. The town stood in the cavern, silent, until Ruth clapped once, Soft, not sharp. Class dismissed, she said. They laughed, then cried, then filed out under sky that no longer demanded but still remembered. Coldwater Ridge had been asked, and for once it had answered, not with conquest, not with spectacle, but with the quietest of victories, a community choosing to be geometry together.